Fail your Ofsted inspection for safeguarding if mobile phones are used in school? Really? Hello and welcome back to At the Chalk Face. And again, I've got my special guest, Kat Morgan, with me today. Hi, Kat. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. I'm glad you invited me back on. I have been keeping track of the numbers on the viewing counts of the videos, and I see that my ones are doing quite well. So I just, before we start, propose changing the name of the channel to CraignDave and formerly Dave, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, well, we get that quite a lot, actually, but it'd be a little bit silly if we start including everybody that's involved in the channel, right? But anyway, look, it's great to have you on. And for those of you that are watching that don't know what all this banter's all about, Kat is quite famous on our other main CraignDave channel because Kat hosts all our Knowledge Byte and Knowledge Megabyte videos that come out every week and every month, where you look at something interesting in computing and explain it within a couple of minutes to the masses. And those are always great. I always learn a lot from them as well. And I know our audience love them. So that's Kat. Anyway, back to the topic of the day, Kat. So it was revealed that a letter was sent by the Shadow Education Secretary to His Majesty's Chief Inspector, Sir Martin Oliver, suggesting that schools should fail safeguarding as part of their Ofsted inspection if mobile phones were seen being used in school. And I'm just interested in what your take is on this. There's been quite a lot of political back and forth, particularly over the last, I want to say, 24 months or so, with Conservatives saying one thing and Labour saying another, and all the other parties chiming in with their perspective, and all sorts of different things happening on the global scale in terms of social media and young people, and we'll get into all that. But I guess the bottom line is, the question for you is this: should mobile phones be banned in school?
I'd like to start us a little bit further back, if that's all right, because I think the answer is no. But I want to give you some context. I think the letter that was sent to the head of the inspectorate was really a bad faith argument, honestly, and really used to push a political agenda, because regardless of what was said one way or the other, it was going to cause a bit of a hoo-ha in any story. And I think that the response has been, the response letter has been very measured and very nice, and a lot nicer than I would have been in responding to the same the same contact.
Well, apart from the fact that somewhere in the letter it said something like, "Excuse me, could you write to me privately as opposed to publishing it in the papers first?"
Well, I like that. You know, you've got to get a little dig in, haven't you? You got to feel good after responding to a letter like that in the most professional manner that you possibly can. But honestly, I think that what's been said there, I think is a very straightforward and a very sensible response. Because I think the statistic is something like 97% of schools in the UK currently already have some kind of mobile phone ban. I certainly have never worked in a school that didn't have a mobile phone ban. And I think the ones that don't have so for very specific and very thought out reasons. Because the default position in schools, as we know, with any new technology, is the moment something goes wrong, you ban it. I mean, I can count on my one hand how many schools have an unfiltered internet connection, how many schools allow ChatGPT, how many schools allow Facebook. These are tiny minorities. So whenever a technology is misused, the first thing to do in schools is ban it. And I've always been very anti that. I'm always a person that believes that you should teach students how to use a technology in the right way and use existing sanctions and existing teaching methodologies, of which we do really well, to ensure that they understand what the right way of using things is. So I think it's a bit of a nonsense, really, to call for a legal mobile phone ban when we're talking about 3% of schools that haven't got it, and haven't got it for a well thought out reason.
So I guess part of your argument here is that if we take another example, we don't say to kids at primary school, don't ever cross a road because you might get hit by a car. We're going to ban all crossing of roads. Okay. Um, Instead, we recognize that roads exist, cars exist. We can't change the world in which we're living in. And therefore, we have to sort of adapt and educate. And we have to teach these kids how to cross the road safely, expose them to it, allow them to take risks, but taking risks in an educated way that prepares them to lead the rest of their lives. I guess that's partly where your argument would come from. And I suppose some people might say to that, yeah, but Kat, you can't apply that, for example, to knives. You don't say to, oh, well, we can't ban knives, so let's just let the kids bring knives into school and we'll educate them about, how to use them sensibly. So, does that argument only go so far?
Well, yes, I am a pragmatist, and I do think there are some scenarios where a phone ban for other reasons, apart from it's just a phone, is a meaningful thing. And I've never not enforced a mobile phone ban. I think it's important that when a school makes the decision, everyone sticks together. But if we look at your analogy of knives, yes, we don't allow knives in school, and students carrying knives in school are, adequately disciplined and expelled, and whatever the strategies of the school are in place. But we still give them knives in food technology, in home economics. We still teach them how to use it safely and effectively in a controlled environment. So I think what I'm saying to you is not that the ideal situation for me, from like a purely this is what I would like to institute in a school that I ran, would be that we don't ban phones and we educate. But that's because a school I ran would be very technocratic and nerdy, let's be honest. And it would be full of people that were utter nerds like me and are happy to make those efforts and are happy to teach those things and are skilled in that. In a normal state-run secondary school in the UK, where computer science is a small sliver of the curriculum and most people do not have the skills to adequately teach and deal with problems with technology, I completely understand the need for an element of a mobile phone ban. And I think that the major issue for me is not so much that they have the technology, because let's be honest, when phones were first a thing and smartphones first became a thing, a lot of schools were keen to use them in lessons because it added a resource to the lesson that we find difficult to put into a normal classroom. We're used to having computers for every student. We're used to having instant internet access. But the reality is that in the vast majority of classrooms in the school, if you're asked about a fact, you can't look it up without going to get a book or going to find a computer room or booking the Chromebook trolley. And that's not really how the real world works. If I want to find out a fact, I get my phone out and look it up straight away. Like, my wife and I can't watch a movie in a 2-hour block. We have to add an extra 20% on for the amount of time we're pausing and looking things up in the middle of it, because interesting things happen. And I think
are a super nerd. I don't think I've ever done that. Enjoy the film.
No, we set aside 30 minutes the other day to watch an episode of an anime, and I think it took us an hour and a half because it was bringing up so many interesting things and arguments and questions, and we were having a good debate in the middle of it. So yes, but that's the sort of nerd I am, right? But I think you can see that from some of the videos I do. I mean, you're very lucky that we only do knowledge bytes and megabytes. When I get convinced you to give me the gigabytes and have a complete series on it, it'll be a multi-hour documentary on USB-C cables. I promise that as my first output. But I think the point that I'm trying to make is that when we first had access to it back in the early 2010s, when they became much more common, schools have wanted to use them because it gave you internet access in a classroom situation. And very quickly, the sort of interpersonal conflicts and the issues that arose from having a communication device on 24/7 became very, very apparent. And I was working, in a very successful academy school that led an academy chain at the time. And we banned phones in class because of the interpersonal conflicts that they were creating. Not because of the phone itself, but because of the way students were using them to continue winding each other up in the middle of lessons between classrooms. And there's nothing more dramatic than a student storming out of science halfway around the school to go to history to pick a fight with the students because they sent them a dodgy text message. So we want to eliminate that completely from our schools. That's perfectly fine. That's a perfectly valid reason for doing it. But there's also a case where if you're in the middle of a lesson and a student says, oh, it'd be great to take a video of that in slow motion so that we can do it, then why are you not using the £1,000 piece of equipment in your pocket to do that for an educational purpose with the express permission of the teacher? It shouldn't be this ridiculous blanket ban where you say the merest whiff of a mobile phone gets you failed in an inspection for a very serious category like safeguarding, where it can start all sorts of other processes. Because that's not what it is. 97% of schools ban phones in some respect, and the vast majority of those have bell-to-bell bans where they're not allowed out. But there should be the leeway to use them appropriately for educational purposes if the educator in the room, who's in charge of all the learning in that classroom, decides that that's a thing that we can allow.
Yeah, and in essence, I think that's the Labour government's standpoint, right? That appropriate legislation and school guidance and everything else already exists. If head teachers want to ban phones in the classroom, then they can already do that. And they've already got behaviour management strategies and ladders of consequences, or whatever you call it, that allow them to take action against students that are breaking the school rules. So things are already out there. So I guess, why is there such a debate at all if schools can already do this? And as you say, at least 97%, if not more, schools are actually doing something already. I guess it begs the question, why are people making such a big fuss about it? I suppose, thinking about it from the experience of myself as a parent and observing my children as students, if you like, and the things that they tell me about what's happening in their classrooms. Because as a teacher, sometimes you're a little bit oblivious to what's going on. You do know what's going on. You do have eyes in the back of your head and the side of your head, and you have this sixth sense, if you like, of what's actually going on in the classroom. But despite that sixth sense, students have a superpower that enables them to still do the things they're not really supposed to or allowed to be doing. And I think from my own children's perspective, they would say, yeah, that's great having a sort of policy where phones should be not seen or heard, let's put it that way. But if a teacher then has an educational reason for using those phones, some of them you've already outlined, things like looking things up for research, taking slow motion videos, using accessibility options for text to speech, and all sorts of other things that we could say are real positives for using mobile phone technology in schools. They would say, despite all that, they are still messaging their mates under the table. The phone is still buzzing in their pocket. They are still instantly getting those attractions, and they still seem to have that need to be connected and have that device to hand and looking at it even when they shouldn't be. So some people would say what you're describing, Kat, is an ideal that doesn't really exist, and it would just be so much easier for the teachers out there if it was black and white and it was like, I know there are no phones because there are no phones.
I don't want to be in an education system that isn't idealist. I don't want to work in a system where we assume that students are doing the worst. We all know that they're messaging under the table at certain points, but that's the point of you being an adult in the room and you having discipline and behavior management strategy. If you see a phone, it should be part of the school's policy to take it and put it somewhere, and the students can reclaim it at a later time. And there should be no argument about that. And yes, I've worked in schools that are a bit more difficult, where the student would put up a fight and an argument about it. And so a lot of staff would be reluctant to take phones off students. I was not one of those people. I would simply state what's going on and make sure it happened. And if it didn't, I'd use the behavior management system to deal with that. And it actually took us overhauling the behavior management system quite extensively to ensure that teachers in the room were backed up to enable that to happen. And the moment that a consistent approach of, hey, phones shouldn't be seen or heard during the school day, the moment somebody didn't put it on silent mode, didn't hide it properly, didn't put it in their bag, and it was taken from them, and they were backed up by everybody involved, then that message got out that you can't just refuse. You can't just pop it on your desk and hope nobody takes it. But it still gives lots of students the ability to have that device on them. And let's be honest, these devices are essential in the modern world. The government itself, as we've done a video on, is pushing for digital IDs. So if the government is saying, hey, you must have a phone because you must be able to access all this data and we must be able to access it from you, then students will feel the same sort of need to have a device and the same need to have it to live in the modern world that we do. And when it's taken from them, they are at a disadvantage and it's problematic and they feel that. So they are more willing to toe the line. And of course, there'll always be people breaking the rules, but there's always people breaking the rules anyway. We have to be pragmatic as teachers. But I think the important thing as educators is you live in a world where you want to be an idealist. We want our students to do what we ask them to. We want our students to be good contributors to school life. We want them to contribute to the classroom and be active in the moment and the conversations we're having and not be texting their friend in 3B about what they're going to have for dinner later on. And I think that's part of the environment, the classroom, the way you set up your behavior management structures and the way you deal with it. And certainly the way I dealt with it was never a big drama. It was always phone, thanks, cheers, pop up on my desk. I mean, even to the point, and this is a bit of a story, but I took a phone off a kid once, put it on my desk, and when I gave it back to him at the end of the lesson, the screen had cracked. And I felt so guilty that I replaced the screen for him myself afterwards. But I mean, realistically, he had his phone out. It shouldn't have been a problem. But you know, as a computer science teacher, you know the extent of their lives that are tapped into those little things. I think the key thing for me though is really that if we're not walking into a classroom every day, hoping that we can get the best out of our students, then what's the point in being a teacher? Because I want to go in every day hoping that everything goes great and everyone learns and everyone's excited. And I know that it's not going to go that way. And I know that I'll need to deal with things along the way. I'll need to use behavior management. I'll need to use, existing relationships and draw upon those and build relationships with the students. That's part and parcel of the job. That's what makes it so fun. But I wouldn't want to walk into a classroom every day, demand everyone leave, everything at the door, lock it in a locker, and then walk around all day with just paper and pens, because that's not even realistic for the world we live in today, let alone the world they're going to enter into when they go into the job market in 5-10 years.
You're a very experienced teacher, though, and you're a very confident teacher. So you even say that with confidence. But are you assuming a little bit too much? I don't want to dumb down the profession. I'm not trying to put myself on a pedestal or anything, but I've watched enough lessons to know that there's a lot of teachers out there that seem to really lack the confidence to challenge appropriately and to know that students are going to do what they're asking them to do. Because, as you know, if you've got any doubt in your mind that a student might challenge your authority, then they will challenge your authority and you will feel undermined. And even the process of feeling undermined will allow you to be undermined. And you get these unnecessary battles, particularly with less experienced teachers that don't have the confidence. And I guess what some people are saying is, look, we can relieve the teaching profession of this unnecessary burden. But by the same token, I guess perhaps it's a little bit naive to suggest that these things never used to happen anyway, right? I mean, when I was at school, when you were at school, there were no mobile phones. I mean, there was no internet when I was at school, right? You literally had a phone which you couldn't use because it would cost 10p to call your mate for 20 seconds or whatever, and your parents would never let you do it. And, you had to go and knock on their door and meet them and walk to school, meet them at break time, walk home, that kind of thing, right? That was the extent of the communication. But it wasn't. It wasn't. Because what we were doing in lessons is we were ripping little bits of paper out of our exercise books. We were writing little secret notes. We were rolling them up and we were chucking them across the classroom. We were nudging the person in front of us with our finger on their shoulder and getting them to turn round and saying something funny, and they would laugh, and then the teacher would instantly spot it and they'd be the one sent out the room and not you who actually caused it in the first place. And all these shenanigans were happening. I mean, those are just a couple of things, and all these shenanigans were happening. So maybe people today maybe they're blaming this on the mobile phones, when in fact, even if you took the mobile phones away, students would still be distracted. They'd still find ways to annoy each other, and they'd still find ways of winding their teacher up or not engaging in the learning process. It's not the mobile phones at all.
Absolutely. And I think it's bizarre of us to assume that a change in the law will change the behaviours. If phones are already banned in schools and students are not are still hiding phones in their pockets and doing all that sort of, even if they were illegal, you still have people bringing them in. You still have people with them on their person. It wouldn't change anything really, apart from that the punishments might be harder or dealt with at a different level. It would just mean 100% of schools had a ban, and they'd all still have to deal with the same problems that we do today. Students hiding phones going off in lockers, all that sort of stuff that happens and is problematic. But I think the important thing is, I think the education profession already knows that not having a mobile phone so they can focus on what they're supposed to be doing is a boon. And they're doing that. And I would argue this, right? I think some of your point was along the lines of, I'm a confident and experienced teacher. I can walk into the classroom and with a reasonable degree of success, command attention and get students to work with me. But that's because I strongly believe in having effective interpersonal relationships with students and building on those relationships and relying on those, knowing that I'll play fair and I'm not just doing it for a power trip. And I think that's an important thing in the way I teach. If you're new to the profession and you're not very confident, well, that's why you rely on the behaviour management system of the school. And I'm sorry to say this, but if a newly qualified teacher, if a new teacher cannot rely on the behaviour management system of the school and cannot rely on that to make sure that the student hands over their phone if they're caught using it, then that's a failing on the part of the senior leadership team. And they should be the people seriously looking at the behaviour management strategies in their school and whether they're ignoring things because they are experienced teachers and they don't experience those problems in the classroom. Because I too often have seen senior leadership teams that are blind to the problems in a school because they don't experience them on a one-to-one level. If they walk in a classroom, everyone behaves. So the problem must be with the member of staff. No, that's a lot of rubbish. If the systems you build are robust enough to allow even the least confident teacher to wield them with precision and make sure the students are listening to their educational content and engaging in what they're doing, then that is a strength of the school. But that is a much bigger conversation than should we ban mobile phones. Schools already ban mobile phones. If the management of how we take those off people is not adequately enforced by the senior leadership team's decision-making, their behaviour management policies, and them backing up their staff, then there's no hope for it, even if this was a law, because those things would still be the case.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I mean, I've been in two minds over this. I'm a bit conflicted, if I'm 100% honest. I feel like I could easily make the argument for either camp and believe in what I'm saying. Part of me just thinks that, look, we don't need these things in school. The question is, do we need everything that's in society in our schools? Or is that just an excuse? We got to prepare students for the world that they're going to live in. As soon as they leave the school gates, they can do what they want. And, part of me wonders whether that's an excuse. And actually, no, do you know what? Within the school gates, we can create a different environment. We can create an ideal, as you sort of described, that doesn't exist outside of those school gates. We could do that. It's in our power to do that. Can
I pick up on that just a second? Because I think that the important thing there is that ideal is a world where a student is able to put their phone down and concentrate on the task ahead of them. And we can help enforce that by using the same kind of mobile phone bans in schools that we have now, which is where you're not supposed to have them. And if we see them, we take them off you. So students train themselves into having the device with them, but not checking it every time it goes off, not letting it distract them, putting it into silent mode and dealing with those sort of things. So that when they do enter the real world, they're not desperately holding it, waiting for that next notification. So I think actually we do enforce that ideal in schools at the moment. We just don't go to some bizarre parallel universe where the things don't exist. Because there's nothing worse than telling a student off for having a mobile phone whilst a teacher is stood behind you checking the time on theirs. I'm a very big believer in it. The rules of the school apply to everyone, not just the students. So if phones are banned, I ain't using mine either. And I think that's absolutely fair. And there are circumstances where an adult needs to use their phone. When we were having my daughter, it was very much about, I need to, every lesson, guys, I might get my phone out because, might be having my daughter today, so I need to be ready for a message. Students very understanding about that. In the same way, though, if a kid comes to me and says, Mum's not very well, I'm waiting for a text, is that okay? Yeah, keep it out on the desk. We understand your circumstances. Everyone in the room agrees that this is an exception. So I think the ideals of our work, of like what the ideal situation is where a student can manage themselves whilst having a device. We do it. We definitely do. But we don't create this fictional alternative world where they don't exist. And we're not then preparing them for the real world. We're just preparing them for a world where they don't have a thing, but they suddenly then have and absorbs every facet of their being.
Yeah, I get that. I also feel, though, that I can almost feel at the back of my ears, probably why my ears are going so red. I can feel thousands of teachers saying, you're mad. You don't know what it's like to be in the classroom anymore. These mobile phones are destroying our kids. They're destroying my lessons. They're destroying our school. They're destroying our society. They're destroying our world. And in fact, while we're at it, let's kick AI out as well. But anyway, let's not go too far down that road. I just feel the strength of feeling behind this argument. It feels like there are more people on the side of we should ban them than people saying, no, there are alternative arguments to this. But maybe there's a bit of a halfway house, and I want to ask your opinion on this as well. Maybe the halfway house is, okay, students having mobile phones for all the reasons that we've already discussed, but there should be a ban and some technological mechanism, whatever that looks like, and we can argue that it doesn't really exist, way of switching off, disabling, unloading, whatever, the apps that are causing the most issues. So we are talking about social media, instant messaging, all those kinds of things. I'm imagining a situation where we have a smartphone, but it's only half smart in the sense that it has all the sensors and other bits and pieces that are really desirable for education. But it's essentially a brick apart from that. And it doesn't have all the communication opportunities, perhaps other than being able to take that emergency call from your parent in an emergency situation. What about that? I mean, this is essentially where Australia's going, not just in school, but across their entire country. What's your thought?
I'll just say this. If you've not taught computer science and you've not taught in a school the mobile phone ban, then you will be completely unaware of the myriad ways that students can communicate with each other in innocuous apps. I remember seeing a spreadsheet once in Google Drive that was literally just a spreadsheet full of messages the students were exchanging by typing them into cells that they shared. No one's going to block that. So students will find a way to share messages, whatever happens. The Australia thing's really interesting because what they've done on a societal level is remove the apps that they deem and they think are problematic for, I think it's under 16s, isn't it? Or under 18s. I can't remember. I haven't got my script in front of me from the video I just recorded, which is a bit embarrassing. But regardless, we take our youth and we say, youth, you cannot deal with the pressures of social media and communication at this frequency, so it's gone. I mean, that's one way of doing it. That's one massive petri dish that we can observe for the next few years and see if that works. And it might work. It might work. But it's not... The apps are problematic because those apps that you've just described have gaming mechanics and they have the sorts of things embedded in them to get you to keep checking them that we get in fruit machines and gambling. And those sort of engagement type behaviors are problematic for society, not just for students that are learning, not just for young people. And I think that it's it's a really, really interesting thing what Australia are doing. But I almost guarantee you that there's not a school in Australia that will unban mobile phones because Facebook is blocked in the country. Because it's not just that. It is the... How many hours did we spend on Minesweeper? How many hours of our lives did we spend finding anything in the computer that was interesting? I sometimes think back to my early years on a computer without internet and think, what did I do? I would sit on that computer for 10 to 12 hours a day. There was no internet access. I was exploring and finding things and messing with stuff and breaking things and just messing about with the thing for a long time because I thought they were fascinating. And I think people will still find a distraction in that, even if we don't. So I don't think a school will will take the bans away just because the apps are there.
Yeah, you've reminded me, actually, when I was at school, of some of the other distractions, right? Things like we'd have pocketfuls of panini stickers and Cabbage Patch Kid cards. And, there was a craze a couple of years ago with the fidget spinners. And there's always something, right? There's always something. The little Tamagotchi pets and all sorts of
Dave,
things.
at the moment, my daughter's school has banned the use of the numbers 6 and 7 together. So teachers, when counting, have to go 6 and 7 because there's a meme, right, where the students do a little dance and shout 6, 7. My daughter's got a top with 6, 7 on it. If you research it, there's no reason that meme exists. There's no starting point. It's just something they find funny. So they currently find 2 consecutive numbers funny. I mean, there's always going to be a distraction.
Yeah.
So I am, again, in the Cat Morgan School of Excellence, where we only take in utter nerds and every staff member is the biggest nerd in the world. Mobile phones wouldn't be banned, and we deal with the problems as they came in, and we deal with them in a professional way. But that's an idealized dream that's never going to happen. One, because no one will give me a school to run because I have opinions. But apart from that, I think it's important to know that even if that is your ideal, the reality of the situation is most of us work in schools with bans to some effect. And the thing that backs us up is the behaviour management and the strength of the senior leadership team. And if that's all in place, then what we have is a really good middle ground for getting students trained in not checking those things every 5 seconds, not being part of the machine of gamification and gambling-based addictions, because we are, even if it's just for 1 hour at a time, we are making them take a break from it. And even if they're checking it sneakily in the corridors as they go around, well, they are building that muscle to take time away from it and concentrate on something else. And I think banning it, and I think importantly, which we really haven't touched on, is calling it a safeguarding issue is absolutely preposterous and dangerous. To say that having a device in a place is a safeguarding issue. And I think that's really part of, the ongoing culture wars where we feel the need to find a simple solution to a complex problem. Because even in this conversation today, we haven't just touched on are phones good or bad. We've looked at the efficacy and effectiveness of an SLT in dealing with behavior strategies. We've dealt with different types of mobile phone bans. It's not just all day. Some people ban them for the lessons. Some people ban them for specific activities. There's a range of things that are going on there. But at no point are you saying the device is the root cause of all evil in a school and we need it gone, and it is a safeguarding issue. That's the thing that really horrifies me. If you trivialize safeguarding with having a phone in a place, then safeguarding becomes an absolute nonsense. Safeguarding is the number one most important thing in a teacher's day. We are unbelievably hyper aware of everything safeguarding related, and we're overly cautious about everything safeguarded related. We have training all the time. We have safeguarding officers that have difficult conversations day in, day out. And if they have to start taking time out of their difficult days to address somebody had a mobile phone in maths lesson 5, then it trivializes that entire part of our duty of care. And I think that's really important that we avoid that. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting argument, actually. I guess what Laura Trott would argue is, yeah, but having access to the entirety of the internet and all the inappropriate and worse material out there, it is a safeguarding issue. But I know where you're coming from. I get it. And I think the other thing that's slightly odd to me, I mean, we haven't talked about cyberbullying. It feels like an entirely different conversation, and we won't have it now. It's related to mobile phones, of course, but it's a slightly different argument at a tangent, and I'm going to propose it for this reason, because we're talking about what's happening inside the school gates. We're not talking about banning phones outside of the school gates. There isn't a government minister out there that's saying that we should ban mobile phones full stop from young people. And therefore, it's just crazy to suggest that it's all about protecting them from cyberbullying. No, all that's going to happen outside the school gates, as it always has, as it always did. Yes, it happens inside the school gates too, and mobile phones can be a vehicle for that within school, but it will happen outside of school. And I think the thing that makes me a little bit uncomfortable is this idea that schools can say, and well, as long as what we're doing inside the school is okay, then it's okay. Well, no, not really. The school is serving its community. And so therefore we have to have a bigger picture here as well, in the sense that these students are going to have these phones the moment they leave the school gates. And if you don't care about that, then why do you care about it inside the school?
Absolutely. I think the schools I've worked in where I felt that they weren't working well were because they weren't serving the community. They were very much insular. What happens outside the school gates is not our problem. But it very much is, because those students bring those experiences back into the classroom, and that affects the way they work with you and the way they work with others. And I think it's very important that we, as a profession, deal. Okay, it's unfortunate, but we are in this job because we want to work with young people. We want to show them the wonders of our subjects. I want to show them all the exciting nerdery about computer science constantly. And, I do it to my poor nephews and my daughter constantly. Well, did you know? And then I go into a 3-hour discussion about it, But that's what I love doing. But unfortunately, part of being a teacher is the weight of society is on your shoulders as well. And we want these young people to be effective people in the real world. And that means sometimes that you need to take on the responsibility of a wider community. And you need to be aware that you're trying to teach them and help them with skills that equate to outside the classroom as well as in. And I think the best schools I've worked at were clearly a part of the community and took things that happened outside the school, seriously, and did things in the wider community, held events, did support groups of parents, all that sort of stuff. And I think if you look around your school and you see that there are members of the senior leadership team that are there past 6:00 on most nights of the week because something's happening in the community, then I think you're in a good place. And that often gives me a bit of positive. Even when I was a member of senior leadership team and had to do that and was like, what time are you coming home tonight? Oh, probably 10. It felt better to be doing that actively and being part of the community than locking the doors and being a tiny little island where we only care about what happens inside. And I think it's really important from a national point of view that we remember that teachers deal with a lot more than just, am I taking a phone off you or not? There are depths of things to do with that device that you might not have an understanding of as you ask that. Be it, oh, I'm a young carer. Oh, this is this is where I get my insulin notifications to remember me to take it if my blood sugar drops or whatever. There's a myriad of reasons why an individual student may need a phone and may need access to it. And if we just wholeheartedly block it, we're blocking an aspect of society that even the government is saying is essential for living in the modern world with their digital ID. And I really, really do think it needs a more nuanced approach that just banning doesn't deal with. And in the same way of the Australian, broad ban, I also don't think that's going to be the most effective way to deal with the problems that they're dealing with, because it is a very blunt instrument. And let's be honest, on a governmental scale, a blunt instrument that people will broadly ignore with VPNs. The same in the classroom. Even if it was a legal requirement, schools ban phones. Cool, phones are banned in school. We are still going to deal with people sneaking them in. And also, the implications of them having a phone in school are significantly lower than them bringing a knife into school. So we would see the same amount of, phones popping in, appearing that we would anyway. I think it's appropriate for us as educators to push back against the sentiment of public outcry, because people want easy answers. And we know in education that people are not simple to, it's not simple to fix problems. People are complex. Children, young people are complex. And there's a myriad of things we need to understand to build relationships and teach them properly. And that complexity is true everywhere. We can't apply simple solutions to complex problems. We have to be on the chalk face. See what I did there? Actually making sure that we're dealing with the problems as they come and identifying strategies that work for our context and our schools. And there are going to be schools. There are going to be small private schools probably where students having phones in classrooms and using them appropriately is a thing that happens. And they don't need to filter their internet, and they don't need to worry about policing AI because they have, the staff numbers and the relationships and whatever to deal with that. It's not the case in most schools. So we have to have some element of banning to deal with that in an appropriate way. But a blanket ban, I just don't think is appropriate at all.
Yeah, and my point is, if it's a safeguarding issue in school, then it's still a safeguarding issue outside of school.
Mm-hmm.
So what are you going to do about that safeguarding issue if you believe it exists outside of school with these mobile phones as well? So there we go. Kat, it's been great talking to you again. Thank you so much for joining me. And I'm sure we'll have another thought-provoking conversation on another topic very soon. See you soon.